So over the past couple of videos, I've been dealing with the popular internet claim that Paul hijacked Christianity. Some like to say that Paul turned Jesus, a Jewish teacher, into a divine figure, borrowing from Greco-Roman religions. But the actual evidence says otherwise. Paul consistently refers to Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God, and most often, the Lord. He doesn't frequently call Jesus God outright, but he doesn't need to. In 1 Corinthians 8:6, he reworks the Shema, the core Jewish confession from Deuteronomy 6, to include both one God the Father and one Lord Jesus Christ. That is a deliberate insertion of Jesus into Israel's monotheistic framework. And Paul doesn't argue for this view like it's controversial. He assumes it. The churches he writes to already accept it. He's not pushing a new doctrine, they're already on the same page. Plus, in Romans 10, Paul says, if you confess Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. Then he quotes Joel 2:32. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. In Joel, the Lord clearly refers to Yahweh. Paul applies it directly to Jesus without any explanation and to a church he didn't even plant. The fact that he expects them to recognize and accept that claim without any resistance suggests this identification was already widespread and accepted among early Christians. Paul's theology also reflects Jesus' own language. In Romans and Galatians, Paul uses the Aramaic word abba, father, to describe the believer's relationship to God. That whole usage didn't originate with Paul, it comes directly from Jesus, who used abba in Mark 14:36 during his prayer in Gethsemane. Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. This wasn't how Jews typically addressed God. It was unusually intimate, more like dad than master. For Jesus to speak to God like that implied some kind of unique sonship. So when Paul picks it up, he's drawing from Jesus' own pattern. He's not inventing something new. Also, when it comes to early belief in the deity of Christ, we know that the resurrection is a huge part of it. In Romans 1:3-4, Paul says Jesus was declared to be the Son of God in power by his resurrection. It didn't make him divine, it confirmed who he already was. And then in Philippians 2, Paul cites an early Christian hymn that Jesus existed in the form of God, became human, and died. Then God exalted him and gave him a name above every other name, so that every knee would bow and every tongue would confess him as Lord. That language comes directly from Isaiah 45:23, where God says this about himself. Paul applies it directly to Jesus. What's interesting about this is that scholars see Philippians 2:6-11 as a pre-Pauline Christian hymn because of its poetic structure, elevated language, and rhythmic parallelism, different from Paul's normal writing style. It likely reflects early worship and theology, which means this high view of Jesus existed well before Paul even quoted it. He also makes it clear that he didn't invent the message of the resurrection. In 1 Corinthians 15:3, he says, I delivered to you what I also received, Jesus' death, his burial, resurrection, and appearances. And then in verse 11, Paul adds that this was the message preached by all of the apostles. And in Galatians 1 and 2, he says he submits his gospel to Peter, James, and John. Now, some people like to say that Paul was just flat out lying about this meeting, or that James secretly opposed him, but there's no real evidence for that. Paul names James directly in Galatians 1 and 2, and Acts 15 shows James, Peter, and Paul in agreement at the Jerusalem Council. James delivers the final decision in favor of Paul's Gentile mission. You can whine all you want that the book of Acts isn't historical, but I will actually be tackling that in a future video. Finally, at the end of 1 Corinthians, Paul includes the phrase Marinatha, meaning come Lord. It is a prayer directly to Jesus in Aramaic, embedded in a Greek letter to a Gentile church. Scholars think Maranatha was almost certainly a fixed expression from the earliest Aramaic-speaking Jewish Christians in Jerusalem, and Paul is merely passing it on. The fact that it's a prayer matters. Jews did not pray to created beings. So no, Paul didn't invent the deity of Christ, and he certainly didn't borrow it from paganism as a person who was steeped in Phariseeism. Yes, Paul claims that he did have a revelation, but this revelation was confirmed by the first generation of Jewish believers, and he taught what they already believed. If you find these videos helpful, feel free to check out my Patreon and consider joining. You'll get early access to videos before they come out, be a part of our private group chat, and you'll help me to continue to put out content that spreads and defends the gospel. Thank you so much for watching.